Trust is like gravity. It's invisible, but it holds everything together.
One of the real critical factors that everybody talks about and nobody understands is trust.
How do we demystify? How do we make real this intrinsically human thing called trust?
When you've driven the trust out, you've removed all flexibility, all strategic pivoting, all creativity. My issue is ability. I can overcome that easily and win trust. But if it's integrity and benevolence, oh my goodness, you may never get trust.
I'd love to know your journey to academia, what you've covered in academia, and of course that work that you've been asked a million times about before, around integrity, benevolence, and capabilities. How, what led you there?
Roger Mayer and I were sitting in our office saying, what is the essence of a business? What drives a business? And we were batting it around. I remember flying to California with him at one time, and we sat at the back of the plane and we just beat this around, and we finally determined that, one of the real critical factors that everybody talks about and nobody understands is trust. And we dove into the literature and looked at this complex web of competing ideas with trust. And because of the competing ideas and models, and there was not a uniform model, accepted model of trust. We felt like we could make a difference here. So he and I started cranking on it and doing some research on it. We went down to Purdue, which was just 2 hours south of us, and recruited David Scorman to work with us. So the three of us became the three amigos. And I'll tell you, that was some of the most fun research I've ever done. We literally lived together for a couple of years. I can't begin to tell you how many blackboards and whiteboards we filled and erased. And just beat it up and write it and beat it up and write it. And we finally got our Academy of Management review paper together. We knew it had to be a compelling, manageable model of trust that incorporated what other people had said, but in a meaningful way. And that's where we came up with defining trust as a willingness to be vulnerable, this risk-taking in relationship, and that perception of ability, benevolence, and integrity, and all of that in the sandbox of propensity, with the feedback and all that. And it was just, the review process for that paper was just a blast. We had very interesting outside reviewers who would bring up the Gurkha warriors and say, how do the Gurkha warriors fit this model? And it was fascinating. And we were delighted. And when you write a paper, you hope that it hits and hits big, but you really never know till it hits the market. Well, this one and my stewardship, but this one in particular, they both have tens of thousands of citations. It just took off. And then people started inviting us to conferences and to speak, and it just took off. It's been very humbling that I've been a part of that. And I give a ton of credit to Roger Mayer and David Scorman, my partners. They were just, I would have to say, if not, it was one of the best working relationships I've ever had. And I still stay in contact with those two. And I reflect with such fondness on our battles at the whiteboard together. It was just so much fun.
Yeah. Just fascinating. You mentioned that it's been cited tens of thousands of times. Let's say it's been cited 100,000 times. I can guarantee you that 50,000 of those sightings came from me.
And I appreciate it. I deeply appreciate it.
I feel I should be paying royalties. Is there some account, at the end of this call, can you just send me an account and I'll give you a cent for every for every citation. So
Yes.
how do we demystify, and I'm sure there's a better word than that, right? How do we demystify, how do we make real this intrinsically human thing called trust? And why on earth do we have to? It's like the air we breathe,
Oh,
right? So why do you and
yes.
I have to connect to talk about this thing and its importance, given the fact that it's so
Oh,
incredibly intrinsic to who we are?
it's a wonderful question, because I can remember when we, me and my team started working on this, on trust. It was exactly what you said. We'd look at trust and say, well, what is trust? And it's like saying, asking somebody, what is salt? Well, it's salty. Well, tell me what salt is. Well, it's sodium chloride. Well, that doesn't do it for me. What is it? And that's where we were with trust. We spent a good deal of our time trying to unpack what trust really is, and it's absolutely essential. It is it's the lubricant that keeps things moving forward in an organization and in relationships, and it's the foundation on which relationships are
Yeah.
based. It's absolutely fundamental.
That's what took you to it. So let me just to build on your metaphor, and there's lots of them, right? So one I often use is
Yes.
trust is like gravity. It's invisible, but it holds everything together. We can open the microphone, look intently into the eyes and hearts and minds of people we're trying to share the beauty of trust with, and it means nothing.
That's right.
That you're able to unpack the. So what is it with this divide, this great cavern between one's passion to express the importance of trust and it's simply not landing? And how do we cross that divide?
That is really a great question, because our model of that ability, benevolence, and integrity is based on a playground, or this box of propensity. And propensity is our background, our willingness to trust, our ability to trust. And it's how we were raised, it's our environment. There are damaged people that may never trust.
Oh,
We
yeah.
actually did some work with abuse victims. And boy, I'll tell you what, they do not want to trust. They're really tight. I could be the Pope walking in the door, and but they're not going to trust because of their background, and the experiences, their life experiences. The other thing that we've done is gone around the world and looked at different cultures, and there are more trusting cultures than other cultures. There are some cultures you could walk in and you're a brother and they trust you immediately because it's their culture. And there's other cultures. Boy, there's some cities in the United States that, boy, you walk in. I'm not going. Let's just say they're in the Northeast, for example. You walk in those cities and you just feel this lack of trust.
Yeah.
And you, it's just a wall that comes up. And I can tell you, it takes time, and the factors of trust, that ability, benevolence, and integrity, different factors have to come into play to overcome those barriers. For example,
Ah,
if I was abused and they take and I perceive that my issue is ability, I can overcome that easily and win trust. But if it's integrity and benevolence, oh my goodness, you may never get trust. You may never be
ah,
able to build that trusting relationship. So
mm,
it's really complex. So it depends on where that propensity and that background is coming from. What
yeah.
you're going to have to do to build trust.
From a research point of view and conceptually, we can isolate those universal principles
Yeah.
and, of course, establish that box or that sandbox you mentioned of propensity. And we can also, not with too much effort, gain a conceptual understanding of what the emotional or the psychological state of trust is. Okay. But it's, as you just said, terribly nuanced or wonderfully nuanced. So how is it from, let's say, a team lead's point of view, or a compassionate or an empathetic or caring colleague, or a trust practitioner's point of view? How do you take those complexities and those nuances into account, and then start to do the work of helping the other, so to speak, foster trust or create the conditions for trustworthiness. I can't imagine it's your top 10 best hits for doing it, and within a finite amount of time, voila, you've got trust. How do we approach this nuanced, complex thing and do meaningful work?
It's a great question. In fact, that's where the research seems to be going this last while. They've been looking at trust in context. For example, I've been looking at trust in family business and in entrepreneurship. And in entrepreneurship, we have something called quick trust, because an investor has to make a quick decision. Am I in this deal or not? And investors, by their very nature, hold back. And if you talk to entrepreneurs, it's, man, when are you ever going to write that check? I need that investment. And they can't get it fast enough. Well, some investors really take their time. I know, for example, venture capitalists are very different than investment angels, are very different from venture funds and banks. Venture funds and banks are very, very risk averse. And so it takes them forever to trust, simply because of the nature of that banking culture. Angels, it depends on the angel. Sometimes all they need is a good story. And they want to take them under their wing. They want to help them. It's so situational. And that's entrepreneurship. In family business, there you've got long relationships in the family. And can a person change? Well, in a family, it's harder to change and have that change accepted. They may have been a real scoundrel when they were in their teen years. Well, they outgrew that. They matured. But boy, they still remember those teen years. And can that person be trusted? Will they ever revert back to that? So you're right. It's very nuanced. It's very context driven. And so the research right now, that seems to be where it's going. Looking at these different contexts and unpacking them.
Yeah. So let's say you choose the scenario. I either have hundreds of millions of dollars to invest, and I've said, Jim, please afford me some of your time to advise me on how to trust in a startup, firstly. Or the other scenario you may want to choose is, I'm looking for the money, and how can I present myself as, in reality, trustworthy? Pick the scenario, advise me. What do I do?
Well, the first thing that I would do is, if I were the $100 million investor, is say, who else has invested and do I trust them? Okay. So I trust because they trusted. They have an insight that I may lack. And so it's kind of that networked trust. And so I will look at who else has invested. If I'm a first and I'm the first one in, and I don't have somebody that I can trust, then I need to do the massive due diligence. Okay. And the due diligence, it's interesting, because what I've looked at, what I've seen in due diligence, the first thing they look at is the value proposition of the deal. Is there a value proposition? The next thing they look at is the person. Can that person be trusted? Is this the person, even if it is a slam dunk, fantastic deal, if I don't feel I can invest in, this is the wrong person to do the deal, I can't trust this person to do the deal, they lack the ability, they lack the integrity, I'm not going to invest. Or I may say, I want to invest, but you're going to be the technical officer, and I want to put my CEO in there. I want to put my leader in the deal. And that often happens in a new venture. And especially by the time it hits venture capital, they will often put their person as the leader of the deal, a person that they vetted, they know, they can trust.
Yeah. So using the framework, which you are so well known for popularizing, the principles which we've discussed so far, using that scenario that you just gave, would you say then that it's the capabilities that they would want to be reassured of? So they've looked at the person, they see the integrity, they see the benevolence, they've seen the proposition, but when it actually comes to execution and management, in other words, the capabilities, that's when they bring another CEO in. Would that be fair enough to say?
Yes, and yet
Mm.
integrity and benevolence are there. And this is very interesting because it depends on this. It's very situational. Which of those factors come to the fore? Um, Early on, yeah, ability may be the factor, but integrity and benevolence are still there. They're just not as prominent. They come, they're there. Because if I feel like that entrepreneur could care less about me and about my group of investors, boy, I can't trust them because they will take advantage of me first chance they get.
What's the low hanging fruit? Even not knowing, the widget I'm taking to market, and even not knowing which territories I'm active in. What's the low hanging fruit that I can bring trust organizationally?
Okay, and this is interesting because if you are a leader, now we'll go back to where we started, and I don't trust, I will not trust, I will not take a risk on another person. That's when we have a contractual society. We turn to the law. So we tie it up and bind it up so much in litigation and contracts that flexibility is not there. Trust is not needed because we've tied it up with law, with contracts. And that's what we see. And so Sim Sitkin, for example, has done a lot of research on legalistic societies. And honestly, if it's a legalistic situation where you're taking all the risk out of it because you're managing with contract, that is a situation where you've driven the trust out. But I'm also saying when you've driven the trust out, you've removed all flexibility, all strategic pivoting, all creativity. I mean, you have removed some of the richness that you could get out of that relationship and out of that business. You've removed the benefits of trust by trying to control the risk.
Yeah. So what if I came to you and I said, and I'm exaggerating to illustrate here, I don't want to see one clause of one contract in my business. I want it to be purely person to person trust. An exaggeration.
Yeah.
But what would you advise me to do in order to foster that type of environment?
Next month, I'll be flying to Miami to work with executives on this very topic. It's how do I build trust? How do I build trust? And if I want people to trust me, I have to affect their perceptions of my ability, benevolence, and integrity. So I have to nurture that relationship. I have to show them where I have ability. I have to maybe do a small project with them to begin with, and grow and show them that I have that ability. I have to try to talk them into giving me the chance and show them examples of where I do have that ability. It might be going online and getting a certificate and saying, I have this certificate. Benevolence and integrity take a little bit more time. That's a little trickier. And that is frequency of relationship. That is spending time together. That is working on a project together. And when it comes to succeeding, giving them the credit, for example, it's literally working on that relationship, and it comes over time.
What happens if I do happen to journey in the direction of trust, as this person you've just advised, and there's not a contract to be seen? What can I expect the outcomes of being perceived and in reality being more trustworthy be? What can I expect in my organization and with the customers that I serve?
Perfect. And this is important because, and it relates to your identity as a company, your culture as a company, the climate in the company. And you have this new person coming, or this new customer coming into that culture. At the macro level, the organizational level, I can look at a company like Apple, and I have a preconceived notion of Apple. Okay. I want to buy that software, and they have 250-page thing that I have to accept to get that software. And I have to decide whether I'm going to read it and sign it. And it's amazing, Dominic, because when I talk to people, nobody reads them. They just accept them. And I say,
Yeah.
why'd you accept it? Well, it's Apple, and Apple can be trusted.
Yeah.
I know a lot of people
Mm.
use Apple, and nobody's been hurt by Apple. So I'm going to sign it. Even though I didn't read it, they have that reputation and climate. Now, I've worked with a German company, and I probably shouldn't give you the name. It's a massive company. They have 280,000 employees, massive company all over the world. They have a very strong company culture. And you either want to work with that culture or you don't. So, for the most part, they come in and they appreciate that culture, and they join it because
Mm.
they know it, and they've developed it. One-on-one
Yeah.
relationships take time. Um, if when you have your spouse or partner that you're trying to attract and woo, it takes time. It's not an overnight thing. Las Vegas marriages very rarely make it.
So what you've to use, world of work type language, which can often get very boring very quickly, but it's really convenient language. So to impose that language of what you've just shared with me, the first is it would be good news for your customer. You're enabling your customer to build or to accept quick trust with you. Secondly, top talent acquisition and keeping them in the workforce is something else that come up, and those two things are
Yes,
huge.
yes, exactly. Precisely right.
And
It makes things move
yeah,
quickly and
yeah,
smoothly,
yeah.
because they know they're going to be treated fairly. They know that the risk they're taking in taking that job, uh,
Mm.
and they're willing to accept it because that reputation is there.
What I try and do is establish an evidence-based approach rooted in the research, right? And as you well know, the trust research, if one cobbles it all together, has in one form or another, it stretches back in excess of 60 years.
Yes.
What does this sound like? I walk into the room and I offer a diagnosis. And what I mean by that is I take those universal principles and I measure through a mixed methodology approach. I'll measure for Integrative Benevolence capabilities. I'll then apply propensity as a moderator. And then we get what I would call a net trust score. Okay, that's step number one. Step number two, in a self-reporting fashion, there are also 4 variables that we use to measure what we call strategy impact. In other words, the team goes, shucks, we are achieving X or we're not achieving X to a certain extent, and we measure that against 4 variables. And the moderator that we use there is what we call a compelling moderator, and that is the ability for the company, the person, the team to share their strategy. So the moderator with trust is propensity, the moderator with strategy is the narrative. So it doesn't matter how good your strategy is if you can't share it. Okay, so you get it. So we give two net scores there, but then what we do is we get very clever and we calculate an average between the 2 scores, and we offer what we call your trust equity score. And to our mind, the reason why that is useful is that over time, if you can measure it, as the net trust score goes up or down, you should see a correlation with your strategy impact going up and down. So it enables the team to identify that correlation, and the proxy data is deep and rich, and it suggests very strongly that what you're doing in the world will improve if your net trust goes up. How does that sound to you as a useful model?
I like it because it's truly the way you started. It's context driven, and for example, about last fall actually, I worked with a group of executives from Abu Dhabi. I had to know what drives that. I got to know their propensity. I got to know their willingness to open up and trust. In the organization and in the culture as well, and in them as individuals. It works, and the driver, it's purely situational. Ability, yeah, it makes sense. I've got to take their propensity into account, their ability, but sometimes it's benevolence, and then I'm looking at benevolence more heavily. Okay, because that's what fits here. When I'm in South America working down there, benevolence is a big deal. It's a real big deal.
Yeah.
It's a big deal.
Yeah.
They assume ability, but you
Mm.
better have benevolence. And
Yeah.
some cultures, boy, you better not violate integrity. If you say you're going to do it, you better do it.
If I'm not mistaken, the integrity is incredibly important in, here comes a generalization, in the UAE region.
Yes.
I understand there that if you give me your word, I will take it and I will hold on to it with no level of drama. But you've given me your word. That's it. But if tomorrow you break your word, again with no level of drama,
It's
that's
over.
it.
It's over.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And in fact, I would say just exactly what you said. In that area of the world, contracts are offensive. Your word is good enough.
How interesting.
And so, I mean,
I didn't know that.
oh yeah, as you go around the world, there's some areas that if I produce a contract, I want you to sign this contract. It's offensive. You're a person of your word. I want to
Yeah.
believe you, your integrity. If you say you're going to do it, you're going to do it. If you violate integrity, it may never come back, no matter what you do.
That your word is your bond is, it's just such, I find that very compelling.
Yes.
Very, very compelling.
Oh, if the company has a warranty and they don't honor their warranty, oh my gosh, in some areas of the world, they are done.
So again, at a high level, let's say you're on a whirlwind tour around the world and you're doing high level 15-minute keynotes around the world. So you're speaking at that level, so to speak.
Yes.
And you speak to the topic of the trust deficit, or perhaps quoting Antonio Guterres from a few years ago, the way in which he opened up the United Nations General Assembly, saying the world is suffering from a bad case of trust deficit disorder, right? And that's the theme.
Right.
How would you acknowledge that? In other words, how would you speak factually to that deficit? And how would you speak to the negative correlations to that deficit? And conversely, how would you speak to the positive correlations to, a trust surplus, if you like? So number one, what is this deficit? How would you make it tangible? Number two, what are the outcomes of the deficit? And thirdly, well, if we could address it, the alternative future looks like this.
Yeah, and this is interesting because I think the deficit, if I were to define it, everybody knows other parties have ability and they're fearful of that ability. And so the world is it's fragmented and everybody has ability and they're afraid of how they're going to use that ability to hurt me. And so when it comes down to it, relationships based on true caring for each other, benevolence, and integrity, you just don't believe them. The most difficult thing is how to heal that fracture. And especially now, when we're so polarized and where each piece is fighting so hard to keep their piece together, they don't want to risk losing what they have. And so they become more and more isolated because they see everything as a threat. Everything is a weapon against them. It comes down to just sick, damaged relationships. Sometimes it takes a crisis to bring people together. It takes a crisis to bring people together. I looked at COVID, for example, and how vaccines and solutions were shared. And I thought that might pull nations together, but it didn't. And so to me, history shows that when we're fractured like this, sometimes it takes some crisis, some event that forces us to pull together.
You've used two words that have got me spinning here. You used the word America.
Yeah.
And you've used the word healing.
Yeah.
Okay. And that's what those two words often don't appear in the same sentence from my perspective on the other side of the world. It reminds me, if you don't mind, of my journey and what happened and America's journey as I perceive it. So briefly put,
Wow.
I remember being so certain about my future. As a 48-year-old man, when I think back 25, 30 years, I remember being so certain about my future. I could smell it, I could see it, I could touch it, and I was awfully confident. From a psychologist's point of view, this is perfectly natural,
Yes.
as you would tell me. But you know where this is going. When the full stop is put on the end of that certainty, the moment that full stop is placed there, before the ink is dried, something peculiar happens, and it's called reality.
Yes.
In that reality, the future doesn't turn out the way you expect it, and you are confronted with a number of choices. And by the grace of God, you go left or right or up or down or stop, whatever the case is. But when that future slips through your fingers, a number of things begin to happen. Well, happened to me. First, and I won't get this in order, but perhaps it's mild sadness, and then disillusionment, and then anger,
Mm-hmm.
and then dread,
Mm-hmm.
and perhaps then even hopelessness, and you're confronted with nihilism,
Mm-hmm.
right? I know that the people in my life, when I was going through that pain and anguish, which lasted a number of years, ended up making all the difference in my life. It just so happened, and I won't get into this part of it, that there was recovery, there was reassembly, there was assimilation. And no, as you well know as a psychologist, we never arrive, but I suspect as a mere layman that there are a couple of core self-concepts that come into play that are enough to hold you together. And then I talk about this relationship between sense of self and the alchemy of opportunity rising to meet you, which is beyond strategy, beyond thinking, beyond plan, but somehow it comes together. So I've taken the liberty of sharing that with you because I want to get onto America. So I think of, again, as an outsider, I think of the journey of America and what little I know about it. I wonder to what extent America has been certain like I was certain, right?
Oh,
America means this and that. And the red stripe means I'm being rude. The red stripe means this, and the star means that, and left means that, and right means that, and the future is that which we understand. And you and I know that this is largely to thank for how modernity clashed with faith. I get it. I won't get into that now, but there was perhaps a certainty which emerged out of all of this. And now, the world being what it is, that future is not so certain anymore. So how is the collective self responding? Where is the sadness, disillusionment, and anger? And who do we look to for that, to return to that certainty? How do you and I walk with quote unquote America during this time
yeah.
as a compassionate person in the fray? Because who will be there when it is time to heal? Just as someone walked with me, and many have walked with me in my journey, how can we together walk with this person called America towards healing?
Your analysis, in my opinion, is spot on. I think America right now is going through an identity crisis. And the real America is in the neighborhoods, in the communities. And it's an identity crisis. And there's certainly some, and I'm going to be very careful here, but some scary nationalism. America first, America, only America. And America's importance to the globe is critical. It is absolutely essential to partner with other nations, not bully, not become so individualistic that it's all about us. And if you don't like it our way, then we're going to do this to you. And the scary thing is we have that power, but that's not how power should be used because we're damaging the trust. I got to tell you, long-term relationships, and you can see, and I could give specific world events just this past 2 days where the behavior brings question about American benevolence and American integrity. No question about American ability, but do they really care about us? Or are we just being used? In the neighborhoods, in the cities, among the people, I think there's a real concern about the number of executive orders that are coming out that just undo things that we've had since the 60s. It's a whiplash. Who are we? Who are we anymore? We have an identity crisis. That's how I'm seeing it. But America is still America in the neighborhoods, in the communities. And frankly, when I go around and speak to people, what I hear is exactly what we're sharing.
As a psychologist, who is also an historian, who is also a strategist, but let me emphasize the historian and the psychologist, although these things can't be separated out. How do you deal with someone who is confused and hurting, who can't see an end game? How do you walk with them? Correct me if I'm wrong, but the last thing you want to do is sort of invite them back into some sort of false certainty. So how do you care for, how do you walk alongside, and how does this relate to trust?
As a psychologist, it's an issue of working with fear. I don't know that you've ever worked for a boss that's a bully. It's the same thing. People withdraw. And so the propensity on the job is, boy, don't make yourself known, retract. It's fear driven. I remember working with a company and the board says, fix our CEO. He's a bully. Fix our CEO. Well, I could see you couldn't fix this guy. It was this individual's psychology, and it was so deeply rooted. It was the wrong job for this person. I actually helped this person get another job, and they're flourishing, doing really well, where that kind of behavior is part of the culture and needed. So we got a new person, and you could just see people opening up again. It's overcoming fear and feelings of vulnerability.
You've been so gracious, very generous. I'm deeply grateful.
Hey, thank you so much, Dominic. It's so great meeting you. It's a pleasure.
It's been an absolute pleasure as well. Thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your day. Enjoy the snow, and watch out for the
cougars.
For the cougars.
Yeah. Take care, my friend.